Welcome to the Sowing Hope podcast. This is a show all about implanting hope in our hearts. I'm Bill Snyder, joined by my friend Ann DeSantis. We're glad you're here for our uplifting conversation about faith and how it sustains our hearts through all the seasons of life. Thanks for walking with us.
And hello, everybody, and welcome to the Sowing Hope podcast. I am Bill Snyder. It's wonderful to be with you. Thank you so much for joining us once again here on the Sowing Hope podcast. As always, I am joined by my good friend Ann DeSantis, and we are in the second part of a four-part series on our book, Hearts Burning Within Us, which is a book for college students. And so today we're going to be delving into all the parts about living the faith, and I'm excited for this topic, Ann.
Yeah, I really am. And I think it was a great idea on your part that we do a whole podcast series on our book. Of course, we wrote the book Hearts Burning Within Us in 2021 with two others. That would be Maggie Riggins and Jen Oakley, who was then Jen Southerton.
Yeah.
And we thank them because we came together with a group of college students, asking them those burning questions that they had about the faith. Because as you and I know, and as a lot of people who are watching this podcast right now, is that college time, it is a time of temptation, a time that some young people do walk away from the faith. And so that's one reason we wrote this book, is to bring that awareness about the importance of sticking with your faith, not only through high school, but all the way through college and for the rest of our lives, for that matter. And so this is the second section of the book that we're going to discuss today, which is called Living the Faith. And if some of you who are listening to this podcast, watching this podcast, would like to buy the book, just go to patchworkheart.org and get some details there on how to buy the book. And so, Bill, I wondered if we could unpack some of those questions on living the faith.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And there's 5 questions in this, or 6 questions in this set, but all of them are super heavy, I would think. They're very difficult, deep questions that we tried to answer really in a quick and short way in the book, but also profoundly too. So, yeah, I think, we can certainly delve into, some of the topics in there. But yeah, this is about, what does it mean to actually put your faith into action in your daily life? And I think for, Catholic students, that's one of the biggest, questions, right? It's not just some theory. It's how do we actually live this on a daily basis? Because that's one thing that I think surprised me in the process too, Ann, was the fact that students were really wanting to know how to do this, not just on Sunday, but every single day of the week. They wanted to know, how do I live my faith, with every beat of my heart? And I think that that's a beautiful, beautiful, beautiful witness that we saw from those students, right? Like the fact that we heard that come out of their mouths in these questions, like, how do I do this practically every day, versus, how do I just show up for Mass every Sunday, or how do I, those were not the questions that we were getting. So these are really deep, really profound questions that, again, we tried to answer with some humor, but also some profundity in there as well. So I'm excited to delve into these topics for sure.
Yeah, I am too. Now, admittedly, Bill, as you know, that this particular section was a shorter section in the book. However, there's a reason that it's shorter, is because some of the actual chapters in this section were more lengthy. I'm just going to read just a couple of the ones were on the morality of unnecessary purchases, living together before marriage, underage drinking, Catholic political decisions, representations of Jesus and interpreting the Transfiguration account, and the church and marijuana use, which I think will be an interesting thing for us to talk about a little bit. Now, we're not going to get into full details about the book because we would recommend that you actually purchase the book. But the one section, which is the first one in this one, is the morality of unnecessary purchases. And I was the one who actually wrote this one. So, I mean, it's only a real short paragraph, so I am going to read what it says. It says, is it immoral to buy things you don't need? And it says it is not immoral to buy things you don't need, but as a Catholic, we should always strive to be a good steward, so that we should do our best to have money to also give to our church, charities, and to help the poor. It's always a better choice to be frugal and to attempt to pay less for items if possible, and to be better stewards of the money God has granted us. We are blessed with all that God provides in our lives. Perhaps the bigger picture is, how can we use our gifts to enrich the lives of others? Because greed is a deadly sin, and prayer and discernment is the best practice to make good choices when it comes to stewardship. So let's talk a little bit about that, Bill. I think the bottom line of it is, it's not so much, how much we spend and how frivolous we're being, but where is our heart in all of it,
Yeah,
right?
absolutely. You know,
Isn't that what it is?
yeah, I would hear my mom quote. She would say, "To whom much is given, much is expected." Right, and it's so true. I know it sounds like it's actually from Scripture, and I've been a blank on where in Scripture that is, but to whom much is given, much is expected. But it also sounds like a Spider-Man quote. You know what I mean? It really does. It's something like, "Hey, wait a minute, did Jesus quote Spider-Man here or something?" But there's a really beautiful, understanding that when we're blessed with a lot, we're expected to give a lot. You know, and I always like that. It's easier for a rich man to go through the eye of a needle, or than it is to get into heaven. Right? Like that is very, very profound. Understanding of the morality of wealth, and there's nothing wrong with being wealthy. It's how you organize, it's how you pack your wealth, to help others, right? I think that's one of those things that I really want to stress, is that, and you did a great job answering that in the book, Anne, because how do you pack your wealth in such a way that you live for others. You give to charity, and when it comes to purchases, right? Like if you're blessed with a lot, are you hoarding it all for yourself, or are you giving it away? Now that doesn't mean that you can't have nice things, right? I mean, I think we would all say that we're allowed to have nice things, but as you said, stewardship is protecting, and using those good things for the building up of the kingdom. So, the other thing to remember, the other scriptural story that comes to my mind too, is that in the temptation of Jesus, right? Jesus is offered all the kingdoms of the world if he bows down to Satan and he worships him. He goes, I will give you all of this. I will give you everything, Satan says, if you just worship me. And we got to keep that in the back of our minds, right? Like when we see all this wealth or all these worldly pleasures coming our way, and we grab as many as we possibly can, right? I have to have this. I have to have this. I have to have this. Is that Satan offering you all the kingdoms of the world, and you saying, yeah, so there's something profound in recognizing that our monetary resources, our purchases, the things that we do, we should be looking at how we use them for the building up of the kingdom of God. And if we're not doing that, then how do we do that better? And so the other thing I think, again, is just an amazing question, right? Like, I didn't ask this question. I didn't even think this would be on the minds of college students, but this was on the minds of college students, right? So that is telling me a lot about where the hearts are of our young people in today's culture. And it's beautiful to see, hey, you know what? Wait a minute. Before I go out and buy, my Lamborghini, am I doing the right thing? And trying to serve the Lord. And that is just by even asking that question, it's just incredibly beautiful.
Yeah, I agree, because it's a temptation for all of us. I think, especially even if we have just a little bit of extra spending money, because we do have a choice with how we're going to spend that, how we're going to use those resources that God has given us, and whether we're going to share it as well with other people who are in need. And just making that smart purchase, right? It doesn't have to be something really extravagant, but something that it's what you need. It's not a broken down version, right? But it's sometimes that middle purchase is probably the best. It's not the top of the line. It's not the absolute cheapest thing that you can ever absolutely buy, but it's something good that is worthy and will, and it'll last. Hopefully it'll last too. Now, another question in this book is living together before marriage. And I think this is a really good one for us to talk about a little bit. The question in the book under chapter 21, which of course was not from Bill and I, this was actually from the students themselves, says, why can't we live together before getting married? It seems like it's impractical these days to wait. Wouldn't we be a lot smarter or better off testing our compatibility and sound financial foundation to enter life together? Why wait? And it's funny that we're airing this podcast actually the week before my own daughter's wedding. Her wedding is October 1st to her fiance Zach, and we're really excited. Now when this is airing, it's actually the week, several days before. And I know that my daughter and my future son-in-law got that all the time. Why are you two not living together? And they are two people that just made that decision that they wanted to follow, what the actual church teaching is about human sexuality. So, Bill, I didn't know if you wanted to say anything about that, because we wrote a whole chapter in this book, didn't we, about living together before marriage. So share whatever you wish.
Yeah, I think, again, the approach that I took in answering this one was that it was from the question itself, right? Like the kids understood that sex before marriage, in the other questions in this book was wrong. I mean, like, we answer those in other chapters in the book, but why wait out of the secular from the secular perspective, right? Like, even if you can live in two separate bedrooms, even if you can do all of those things, like, I think in fact, I think the way I wrote it, I'm just going to read it because, it was kind of, a practical response, right? So we addressed, of course, having premarital sex in another question in the book, which I'm sure we'll talk about today. But I said, as we mentioned in a few of the previous questions regarding sexuality, God doesn't want you to have sex before marriage. Putting yourself in a situation where you're living with someone who is physically and emotionally attracted to you is to surround yourself in a constant state of temptation. It can also cause scandal because friends and acquaintances might just presume you're having sex. But let's say, for the sake of the argument, you were able to completely avoid premarital sex should you live together prior to marriage. Marriage is a sacrament. It gives supernatural grace to the recipients, meaning that when your better half asks you to do the dishes every night for 7 consecutive weeks, pick up your socks off the floor, or run to the store at 1:30 in the morning, you will have the grace to realize they aren't being selfish or asking too much of you, because you made a lifelong vow to love and honor them all the days of their lives. I'm not going to read the full response, but that was the angle that I took in it, just to kind of give you a taste of it. And again, it was not from the sex angle. It was from the angle of, how are we, as husband and wife, dying to self. And when you have a relationship where you're living together prior to marriage, research actually states that you will hide certain aspects of your character. You'll hide your character flaws because you want to impress the other person for a period of time, right? So without that commitment, you're like, oh man, I know I'm a really messy person. My wife is really clean, right? And if I live together, she would know, man, I'm a really messy person. So let me hide that aspect. I'm going to do my best. And then there's an aspect there, right? Like, you're trying to impress so that you can test it out better. And there's a lot of research. In fact, we even linked one of the research articles in the book itself on that. and that the divorce rates are actually higher when you live together prior to marriage. And so, because you're hiding an aspect of yourself to impress the other person, and that's funny, but it really is true. So, practicality states, if you really want your marriage to last longer and last forever, don't live together before marriage, because you are vowed. Once you're married, you're vowed, right, to love and honor and serve that person every day of your life. Before that, you didn't make that commitment. You didn't make that vow. And I know when I looked into my wife's eyes on my wedding day, like, it meant complete, total sacrifice for of myself. And do I live it perfectly? No, but the grace of the sacrament allows me to the opportunity to do it better the next time, and I think that's really important for young people to remember.
Great job, Bill. And you're right. I mean, we can look at it in two different ways, right? You can look at the sexuality aspect of it, and then you can look at the actual, like, living in the same place. But they really do. I think the point of it is that they do intermingle. They do go together, and it is a vow that you make on that day, as Bill said. It's very important to take that seriously in every way. And when you give yourself to someone on that day of your marriage, you're not just giving them, your intellect, your mental, all of those aspects of who we are, right? Emotional, physical. We're giving ourselves totally, right? And so it should be done after that event of the wedding itself, the totality of it, really. It's not, shouldn't be before that. So that's what it really comes down to, is that when we're giving ourselves, physically to, it should be, right, according to what we believe, after you make that vow.
Mhm.
And so the next chapter in the book is underage drinking, which I have to say, this one, when we wrote the book, when we actually discussed these questions, this was the one that kind of took the longest, I think, because there were two different ways of looking at it, right? There's some states that it's 21 or, before 21, and some countries that it's at like 18. And it was like, okay, well, if it's not a sin in, say, Wisconsin or whatever to drink before 21, but it is in Pennsylvania, is it really a sin? Because it's just kind of a law, a civil law or whatever. But what it comes down to, and I think it's best said in this one of the last paragraphs of what we wrote, we say, remember, it's easy to obey the laws and rules that you agree with, but a true test of character is to obey those we do not like. While it may not be quite unpopular, obedience does not ask your opinion or ours. Therefore, we will refrain from sharing what we personally think about the law. And that's kind of how we answered that, because we had a lot of kind of debate during that, Bill. And but I think at the end of the day, just to answer the question, is it a sin if you're living in a certain state? Say I'm in Pennsylvania, and if my child or someone I know, if they're drinking before 21, would that be considered a sin?
Yeah.
Yes, it would. And
Yeah.
why? Because it's disobeying the law, which has a good intent. Now, we know there's laws that don't have good intent, right?
Right.
We know that there's laws that are put out there that aren't always the best for society, but for something that we can judge and that the church has judged as, okay, well, this one is to protect people, right?
Right.
So yes, I mean, what level of sin? Now, I wouldn't be the one to judge that. Like, what kind of sin would it be, right? Because there's all kinds of circumstances there too.
Yeah.
But Bill, I didn't know if you wanted to share.
No, absolutely. And I think the other big piece of this is to remember, first of all, yes, it's sinful, to break a just law. Just law theory states, that we are to follow just laws that are placed into, a certain sphere. And as Catholics, we have the opportunity to either follow them or not, right? I mean, that's kind of like what God says. Either follow these, follow my laws or you don't. We don't have to like it. We don't get it. We don't get a vote on whether we, like the laws or not most of the time. We can vote certain politicians in and out, to change these laws. But if they're just, if they're for the good of society as a whole, And underage drinking can be seen as something good for society. Putting laws around that, so that brain development of children can be developed properly. Right, your brain isn't fully formed until you're 25 anyway. But here we are, really working very, very hard to tell you that it's sinful to break a just law. At the same time, I want to remind any college student listening to this that that biblically, God's law is to drink in excess is sinful, right? So while certainly breaking a just law is sinful, if you are 21, if you are 35, if you are 58, it doesn't matter how old you are. If you are drinking to get drunk and to not just in a social setting, 1 or 2 beers to relax with your friends, and drink responsibly. If you're drinking irresponsibly, then it is sinful. Getting drunk is a sin, regardless of whether you are 15 or whether you are 25. So, what benefit does it give to you if you drink underage? That's the other question I'd ask. What benefit does it give you? To be the popular person at a party? To be, what are you gaining by drinking underage? That's my question back to students, right? What are you doing, and what are you gaining from drinking underage, and what setting are you in? Again, like the drinking age in Puerto Rico, where my wife is, was 18. And it still is 18. So she had a vastly different experience growing up than I did here in the United States. The drinking laws didn't start until then, and then or they started earlier than they started for me, right? So vastly different experience with alcohol, but also they don't have just a bunch of college binge parties either, right? So there's multiple ways to see this, but the reality is, if you're not respecting the laws in your local area, where you are currently residing, that is sinful, and our opinion on it. And our opinion on it really doesn't matter. as we said in the book, we could give you our opinion on it, and it can differ all and it did, right, between the kids, between the 4 of us authoring the book. It differed, and there were a lot of different aspects of it, but it didn't really matter, did it? The law is the law, and we have to follow it if it's just, as a Catholic.
Yeah, that's a good point. And I will mention too that we actually had a Catholic priest kind of read over the book and make sure that, it was theologically sound. And we did have him double check over that particular chapter, because we had some concern because of all the back and forth that we did. And, everybody has their own experience and their own thoughts about underage drinking or drunk driving or whatever it is. I mean, I grew up in a family where my mom's brother, when he was 23. Now, granted, I believe, he was over the drinking age, but I mean, he did die in a drunk driving accident. Unfortunately, he was the driver. And unfortunately, not only did he die, but others died too. And so, I heard growing up all the time to be careful not to drink and drive, and how important that was, because my mom lost a brother. And my grandparents were distraught by that too, and we all have our family stories, right, about how we've been affected by that. And so for me, that did have an effect on me and safety and everything else. And so, I guess, but in the end, like Bill said, what it comes down to is, what's the just law? What does the Catholic Church really teach about this? And it's not for stealing away our fun either. It's not for that at all. It's just to protect. Now, there's other discussions that we had in this particular section, but Bill, I thought we could kind of end with one of the ones that I'm sure that some people that are watching might have some questions, and it's the church and marijuana use. And the question itself was, What is the Catholic Church's stance on marijuana? Is it legal? It is legal in certain states and countries. It is used for medical reasons in social contexts and to achieve relaxation. While it is used to being seen as a quote bad drug, it is now widely accepted as a good thing for individuals and for society. What should my approach be to this as a Catholic? So, Bill, I know that you were the one when we wrote the book. All of us took a different section. Like that was the one that we worked on. Mine was morality, so I did the one for whatever reason. I did one on drinking, but I believe that Bill, you did this one on the marijuana use. So let's talk about it.
Yeah, for sure. And again, you're at college parties. It kind of goes hand in hand with the underage drinking, but there's a little bit of a different twist with this because this is, a psychedelic drug, right? It causes, a psychedelic response in your brain, and achieves relaxation or whatever the question says. But there are some benefits to it. There are that we hear about in society. Many states are legalizing it right now as well. But as a Catholic, should I really be smoking marijuana? And the answer has to be unequivocally no. And I quote scripture. It's 1 Peter chapter 5 verses 8 and 9. Your opponent, the devil, is prowling around like a roaring lion looking for someone to devour. Resist him steadfast in faith, knowing your fellow believers undergo the same sufferings. Be sober and vigilant. Be sober and vigilant, right? That's how that scripture passage begins. And so you have to understand that when we are to be sober, like I said, drinking to the point of getting drunk is sinful. Using drugs to the point of where your mind is altered, you don't have all of your faculties being able to make rational decisions is also sinful. The church teaches that. Now the question about the medical aspect of this, right? When we begin to look at the medical aspect of it, I talk about this. Is it? I say we have an obligation to God to live soberly and use marijuana. The use of marijuana can provide a foothold for Satan to enter our souls and wreak more havoc upon us. In the sense of medical usage, could a case be allowed under the strict medical care of professionals? It might be considered reasonable. However, with the advancements in pain management drugs that we have available today, it is not a necessity. Also, keep in mind that physical suffering has an important purpose in our lives and can help us grow in a relationship with God. God's plan of salvation didn't include transporting our minds to an altered state or magically doing away with all of our pain. Rather, he showed us that he was willing to become one of us, experience the human condition, and redeem us by suffering an excruciating death for us. Jesus says, "Whoever does not take up his cross and follow after me is not worthy of me." And so finding a constant escape of our pain through drugs or excessive alcohol, whether it be emotional or physical, is not appropriate for the disciples of Christ and certainly sinful. So you have to understand that, it's, okay, we're supposed to escape our pain. And pain, look, I can go on off the personal reference right now, right? I've been through 3 open heart surgeries. The last one I remember when I was 27 years old, right? The first 2 experiences I had when I was a very, very young kid. I was 3 weeks old. I was about a year old in my second surgery. I will tell you that I did not have any pain management drugs for the first 2 surgeries. My surgeon did not believe in pain drugs whatsoever for infants, and so I don't remember that pain because it was too young to remember it. But let me tell you that when I was 27 and I entered the hospital to have open heart surgery, I certainly wanted, pain management and pain management to be available to me. But I certainly did not misuse it, right? There were some difficult moments in the very beginning of that, recovery process after I first woke up that were really hard, really painful, and the pain level was very, very high. Did I use, drugs to help do that? People that suffer from chronic pain, I can understand, your position. You don't want to be constantly living like that. But there are drugs out there that are better choice than marijuana to do that, and work for you. There are better drugs out there. So yeah, I do have experience with that. I do have an understanding of what pain management drugs can do and how they help. But again, it's not something that you want to be addicted to, right? Even prescription drugs can be misused. I would get off of that stuff as fast as I could, man. I was on Advil 48 hours after my surgery, heavy doses of Advil. I wanted no part of the heavier, drugs that they use in pain management. Within 48 hours, I was off of it. And again, it's also embracing the cross. It's embracing the cross a little bit, in the medical sense. Recreationally, it's definitely a hard no. Could you make a case? Maybe, but I think that there's enough technology and newer drugs out there, under the strict care of medical professionals, that you don't need it. That is probably a little bit of my opinion sneaking through there, but again, for recreational use, it's a hard no by the church. So I'll kind of leave it there.
Yeah, Bill, thank you so much for sharing your experience there. Now, I know we got to end pretty soon, but at the end of that chapter, I just thought it was interesting. Now, remember that this catechism quote is not directed toward those who have medical issues or whatever, okay? But I'm going to read what the catechism says. It says, the use of drugs inflicts very grave damage on human health and life. Their use, except on strictly therapeutic grounds, is a grave offense. Clandestine production of and trafficking in drugs are scandalous practices. They constitute direct cooperation in evil, since they encourage people to practice practices gravely contrary to the moral law. And that's in the Catechism of the Catholic Church, 2291. So I just wanted to end it there. And as you see, that catechism quote isn't about directly about those who are taking medical drugs for different health issues. It's talking about recreational. So, Bill, thanks so much for everything on this podcast. It's been great. I can't wait for the next one.
Oh, yeah, absolutely, Ann. And congratulations to your daughter and your whole family for the upcoming wedding. It's going to be quite the event. So congratulations.
Yes. Thank you. Can't wait. Can't wait.
Absolutely.
And congratulations to Elaine and Zach.
Yes, absolutely. Well, folks, until next time, from all of us here at the Patchwork Heart Ministry, we hope that you have a wonderful week and weekend. May God bless you abundantly. Keep beating to your Catholic heart and sowing hope into those broken hearts.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Sowing Hope on Patchwork Heart Radio. For more information about this podcast and our ministries, visit our websites, patchworkheart.org and andesantis.com. You can also follow and interact with us on Twitter at PWH Ministry or Andy Santis 2.